much, André. Bonjour à tout le monde. Je ne vais pas continuer en français parce que, comme Sacha, tous mes slides sont en anglais et il y a plusieurs étrangers comme moi ici. Mais merci pour être arrivé aujourd'hui et pour écouter. Okay, so that was the fun intro part in French. I was going to do a Steve Ballmer impression, like deployers, deploy, deliver, but no, I decided it would be a kind of bad idea, and I haven't had enough coffee for that anyway. So probably not a good idea. So what am I going to talk about today? Well, okay, let's do the about me slide first. Boring. Thanks, Andre's already described it. Basically, I'm a high-performance software developer by background. I did artificial intelligence and then lots of other stuff. And then I basically have spent a lot of time both on the dev side and on the ops side of a lot of projects. Now I'm the VP of products for ZBL Labs, so we make tools for DevOps and continuous delivery, which means I spend a lot of my time in PowerPoint and no longer in code. But I do the coding in the evening, so I try to keep myself, I try to keep it real. So as I said, we're a vendor of products for DevOps and continuous delivery. There's a million out there, of course, and if in some situations we'll be able to help you, and in others, hopefully you're already doing great. Well, what do we try to do? I think what every vendor does, allow you to do things faster, better, cheaper. But of course, everybody says that. Who would not say that? No, our products will make you slower and more expensive. No, it doesn't make any sense. My colleague Benoit here can give you lots of interesting examples that are pretty relevant also here, obviously, in the French market. So, what's our agenda for today? I'm going to spend just 3 or 4, you've talked about continuous delivery all this morning, so I'm really not going to say more than the barest minimum. And I'd like to also maybe give you a little view on what I think we can really all achieve here together. To me, the big picture is the big amazing thing that we can do. And then I'd like to talk about, how do we make this happen? How do we get the tools, the practices, and the culture that are required for this? And especially, how do we get to a culture if we don't have it yet? It's very easy to say if you read an article about Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever. Yeah, they do it, great. But it's all easy to read about what the end state can be. I think for a lot of us, the challenge is, how do we get there? And then I'll talk about how to actually make sure when you start an initiative, it doesn't just stop when you have the first little incremental improvement. And after all the theory, then I'll talk about some really practical stuff you can hopefully do, because theory's fun, but everybody has to go back to a day job afterwards, and then it's really nice to have some idea of what you can actually practically do. Okay, so here the lightning recap coming up. What is continuous delivery? This I think is from Wikipedia. It's a set of patterns. It's basically stuff you can do to help teams get better and faster. And that all sounds lovely, very nice. Who would say no to that again? But if you really ask people, so I do this when I start talking to potential users, so tell me, what do you really think, what does continuous delivery mean for you? Is it, I'm going to build a delivery pipeline, I'm going to get Jenkins or all these other tools, and I'm going to build this great pipeline? Or is it a type of release process? Is it more of a kind of process thing, a way of releasing software? Or is it an IT methodology, something like Agile or ITIL? Sorry, I didn't mention that term. Or is it really a different way of actually doing business? And so this is the thing I would like to just spend 1 or 2 minutes talking about, because it's more than just some kind of technology stuff. That's great, that's fun. I love playing with the tools. I'm a big tools fan. But ultimately, that's something we might enjoy. Our users don't see any of that. This is really about a different way of potentially doing business. And the way I think about it, if we think about the way software delivery works today in general, it's something we as consumers would never accept, never. I remember when I used to buy a book from a mail order company, or order food for takeaway, 5 years ago or 8 years ago or whatever. You'd get this old menu, and it would be like, somebody had put it under your door and it was stained, and you rang them up and some boys told you in the basement. And then you ordered something and you gave them your credit card number over the phone, or you promised to write them a check or something. And then sort of 5 hours later, a cold pizza arrived, which is not what you ordered. It's a horrible experience, right? I mean, nobody would do that nowadays. You know, we are used to Grubhub or Foodler, Uber, Amazon. You buy a book, you click a button, you get an immediate tracking number. You can put it in at any time. You know where the book is, whether it's being shipped. There's lots of nice visibility, traceability of the process that we use in our daily lives to buy stuff. And so we would never, you know, if somebody said, well, why don't you write down on a piece of paper what you want, send it to me, and I'll come back in 6 months and give you half of the stuff you wanted, but all this other stuff you didn't want, you'd say, no, I don't want this. But that's what software delivery is like today. Like for most of our users, our customers, not us as labs, but us as an industry, they experience software in the same terrible way as it was like buying anything 10 years ago. And it can be different. I mean, software can be a track and trace thing. I checked with Benoit, La Poste hasn't had any like IT crisis because I didn't want to put a slide up there with that. But no, wouldn't it be nice if you could, you know, you as a business person, you want a feature, or as a customer, you tweet about it. I want the button to be bigger. And then they give you a tracking number, and you put it into the system, in development, in the pipeline, in QA testing, going to be delivered 3 weeks, and then when it's out there, you see it's out there. Why should it not be possible? And I mean, to me, this is what continuous delivery is really about. It's about making the delivery of IT, what we all do, what we get paid for, what we hopefully enjoy doing, a modern business, not a business that's like 15 years old and that we would never accept in our lives as consumers. And that's why, I mean, that's what motivates me. I think this can be possible. And continuous delivery is a great way of getting there. It's maybe the best way that we've found so far of doing this. Okay, enough about the big vision stuff. So why are people adopting continuous delivery? Well, it's a hot trend. I guess that's why you're all here today. You know, you've read all the articles. People are adopting it. Maybe your CIO's heard of it. And he says, oh, I want this thing. It sounds great. I think in relation to other initiatives that are very popular right now, things like DevOps, and the messaging is incredibly confused. You know, a lot of what is one and what is the other, depending on who you ask, it's very difficult to pick them apart. I think the thing about continuous delivery that's quite appealing is that it talks about things that obviously seem valuable to the business. It's not about, oh, well, we'll work together more and that'll be great because we'll all like each other more, which is a little bit sort of the underlying DevOps message, which is, I certainly, it resonates with me, but I'm not sure whether it resonates with my boss. Continuous delivery is about clear business values. It's faster time to market, better quality stuff that your customers really asked for and they feel you're more responsive to them. More of this kind of track and trace idea. And then the other obvious one is like, if you're not doing it, one of your competitors probably is doing it. We had a discussion with an insurance company, and they're like a very old, you know, they've been around for 200 years, and their business is pretty stable, and you know, they don't feel any real need to deliver much faster. They don't have users shouting about it. But what they're really scared of is that 5 people somewhere in a garage with some servers on Heroku or whatever will open up a business to compete with them and will destroy them. And that really keeps their CIO awake at night. So if this sounds like I'm scaring, you know, trying to do the big shark thing, no, it's true. It's true. I mean, if you're not thinking about ways to make your customers happier, faster, so one of your competitors probably is. And we certainly see this in all industries, whether it's banking, retail, insurance, whatever. Okay, who's doing Agile here? Who's using Agile methodologies on it? Don't worry, it's okay to put your arm up or not, that's fine, nobody gets, I'm not going to tell anyone. So for those of you who are doing Agile, this sentence may ring a bell. The sentence, our highest priority, so the underlining is from me, is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. If you know what it is, great, good for you, bonus point. This is principle number 1 from the Agile Manifesto. Not number 4, not like an optional extra. It's the most important thing in the Agile Manifesto. If you're not doing this, I can say this here, it's, of course in practice it's different, but then you're not really doing Agile. It's worth thinking about. Even the agile guys, and often it's not about buying a whiteboard and like bunches of stickies in different colors and moving them around. This is really what it's about. It's getting your stuff out to your customers. So a good quote to have for your boss when he says, no, you don't need to invest in continuous delivery. It's got nothing to do with this. The other one is the other overlap that I've already mentioned. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. If you're approaching this space right now, I'm pretty sure it's almost impossible to try to figure out what the difference is, what DevOps exactly is, what continuous delivery is. Every single tool that I've seen on the market in the past, 6 months is a DevOps. It's like if you build a screwdriver to open up a rack, it's a DevOps screwdriver. I mean, it's difficult to pick this apart. And of course, everybody's piling in, vendors, analysts, everybody else. So it's difficult to pull them apart. I think the point for me is I don't care what you call it ultimately. These are just names. And I also don't really, so I don't care what you call it. What I think is very important is that you know why you're doing it. Doing DevOps or doing continuous delivery for that matter is not a goal in itself. I mean, it might be to some technical people, and I certainly just enjoy building pipelines because it's cool to be able to do this. It's like, well, for me at least, I like Lego too, so it's obvious. But ultimately, if you're going to get somebody to pay for this, there has to be some business reason behind it. Doing DevOps just for the sake of doing DevOps, however you define it, is not going to get you anywhere. There has to be some motivation for somebody to do this. And that also means, and to be honest here, there are of course situations where like full continuous delivery doesn't make sense because it's not what your customers want. Like we have this problem a little bit. A lot of our customers run on-prem software. They don't want to update our software every 5 minutes. They go crazy if we did that. So there are natural trade-offs that you have to make your customers happy. And ultimately that's what it's about. So again, if you're more interested in talking about how I see DevOps and continuous delivery, please come by. We can talk about that for a long time. Okay. Now on to the second part, if you like. So this has nothing to do with IT, these particular definitions, and we can talk for hours and hours, and many PhDs and books have been written about the definitions of these three things. So for the purpose of this talk, let's just stick to these. A culture I'm going to talk about means it's a set of values or beliefs, traditions you might call them. Practices are things that you do, actions you take that derive from these values and beliefs. And tooling are things that you use to actually carry out these behaviors and actions. And to make that concrete, to give you, one more slide. So how are these related to each other? Well, culture typically expresses itself through practices, and you carry out practices using tools. And again, this has nothing to do with IT. This could be totally generic. Just to prove how totally generic it is, I'll give you a totally generic example. My girlfriend's American, and so one of the things she introduced me to, which I found really weird, is all this marshmallow roasting stuff. I don't really like marshmallows. I think they're pretty horrible. But anyway, what she really introduced me to was not marshmallow roasting, was this idea that, you're camping and you're outside and you're with a bunch of friends, and that's just part of the culture. It's just a fun thing you do. You sit, you talk, you drink bad beer, it's American. Well, the Americans have good beer, but they don't export any of it. And certainly the stuff that, anyway, let's talk about that later. Anyway, so that's the culture part. The practice part is that one of the things you do at one of these gatherings is, they like roasting marshmallows. And the tooling part, this is America, there has to be a tool to do everything. Discovered that when trying to cook there. So that is a thing I found on Amazon. It's amazing. It's called the Real Roaster. Basically, it's like a fishing rod for marshmallows, right? You put the marshmallow on the top, and then you hold it in, and then when it's warm enough, you can kind of like, whoop, and then you pull it in, and then you eat it. I'm sure it breaks after 3 minutes, like all these things do. But anyway, that's the tool. So why don't you just use a stick? Whatever. Long story. So a few things to note about culture. Once something has reached a cultural level, it's extremely resilient. If the Real Roaster breaks, which I'm absolutely sure, as I said, it will do after like 2 or 3 times, because it costs like $2.99 or something. It's not like people will stop roasting marshmallows. They'll find ways to fix it. They will maybe even use a stick or something else. They'll figure out a way. So once you have something at a cultural level, it's no longer really dependent on the tooling. People will find their way around it because they have an internal motivation to carry out these practices and make them work. Like I run because nobody else wanted to, as with many things, I run the CD CI setup for Apache JClouds. If it breaks, and if that flaky test goes and hangs again, and then the Jenkins build is stuck. Jenkins build's courtesy of DevCloud, by the way. Thank you very much for Apache JClouds. I feel bad about it. Like even if it's late at night and I should be doing something else, I get this bad feeling. I'm like, oh crap, it's broken again. And I will log in from whatever device I'm on and I will try to fix it. I'm not saying everybody should be like that, but I'm saying that's what an internal motivation does. And you're willing to try to get things to work again because you feel bad when things are broken and you feel good when they're working. Now, of course, one thing to bear in mind here is that culture is all well and good, but there is always a trade-off. So there is a bit of a groupthink danger, especially in IT where we haven't really solved the problems yet. You have to be open to new ideas as well. So whilst it's certainly good to have a culture, it's definitely important to find a way to encourage people to voice different opinions and to say, this isn't really what we want to do. Maybe we should try to do something else. But again, this is not a trivial problem. It's not historically solved, so we can certainly discuss this a little more. I'm going to go get some more. Oh, look, there's a bottle down here. I didn't see it. Anyway, so what's the problem here? Well, as I said, most of us are not at the point where CD is part of our culture. Culture is really hard to impose from the top. Ask the Soviet Union or many other people. It doesn't work. You can try for a long time. We historically haven't solved that problem yet. As I said, in most organizations, the CD culture isn't there yet. That's why you're here, because you want to figure out how to do this. So what can we do about this stuff? Well, let's think about it a little bit. Let's think about how we can bootstrap any kind of culture or a CD culture. I mean, I think one of the things we don't do very well in IT is learn from other disciplines as well. I mean, we don't even learn from the people in ops if we're in dev or the other way around. We certainly don't learn from disciplines outside of IT. This kind of stuff is basically sociology, has very little to do with IT specifically. And I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities to learn from how people try to integrate cultures, cities, societies. It's the same problem. But let's stick to CD here. So let's look at those three pillars a different way. Turn them upside down. So I said at the beginning, it seems pretty obvious, culture is expressed through practices, just carried out using tooling. Now let's have a look at it maybe a different way. Let's think about tooling, which enables certain practices, and if they're good, if they help us, then that can give rise to a particular culture. Well, so far this is just a stupid little game with arrows. But what's the key thing I'm talking about here, really? I'm trying to figure out whether there's a way to change the causal relationships, whether we can start out with something else and then move towards the others. Why start with tooling and practices? Well, because it's easy. Now, we said doing culture top-down, very, very hard. Tooling, comparatively incredibly easy to download, set up, get running. You can find the famous server that somebody's forgotten in a cupboard somewhere. You can download like most of the tools in this space, even ours. You can download, you can try them out for free. Just do it. It's not, there's low risk. You're not going to break anything. You're not going to have to send people to re-education camp or something like that. It's pretty simple to do. You can do a skunkworks type project here on tooling. And the nice thing about tooling is in most of the situations I've seen, the big problems ultimately, of course, are process, are cultural. But there are plenty of small problems that you can solve quickly just by putting better tooling in place. It takes us 8 hours to get an environment up and running because we share 4 environments between teams and the last team screwed up the configuration and we have no idea what they did. That's a really, really easy, well, depending on how complex your environment is, but that is something that you can fix with tooling. And you can show very quickly that we've gone from 8 hours to 5 minutes. That's a really obvious benefit. It's really nice. So there is plenty, in most environments, there's plenty of low-hanging fruit that you can address with tools. And that's pretty cool. because then you have something you can show to other people that hopefully motivates them, and you put together more of this kind of stuff, and then eventually you can show your boss something, or your boss's boss, and then you can get some money, and then you can actually do this not in your spare time, but maybe even in a real project. And there's a little danger when you do this that I want to point out. That's this quick win chasm thing. And what I mean by that is that yes, there's lots of low-hanging fruit, but it's pretty dangerous if you just pick that low-hanging fruit and stop there. So this happened, I ran into this a few times in various organizations. Basically what happened was, they liked the idea. It was mainly CI at the time, but they also were trying to do a bit of CD. And it sounded like a great idea, and they downloaded a CI server, and oh cool, we now can run our builds regularly and see whether they work. Nice, good idea. But we don't really have time to implement this properly because we're all busy. Production's always on fire. Sound familiar? No. So we'll get some consultants in because they're experts. They know how to do it. They know all the best practices. They know which of the 400 Jenkins plugins to really use to do a specific thing. Great. So we'll get them in, and they'll build us this pipeline setup, and then they'll hand it over when they're done. And they did it, and it was great. It was beautiful. It was, wonderfully done. It was very easy for everybody to use. They got all the tests integrated. They had nice code coverage metrics that actually made sense, not all the getters and setters, but real stuff. And that was cool. And we loved it, and it was easy to use, and it ran, and then something went wrong. And we were all busy, and nobody could fix it. Or nobody really had the interest to fix it or knew exactly how it worked. The consultants were no longer at the company anymore. And the integration tests started to get a bit flaky. We thought it might be something to do with a JVM version, but we didn't really know. So we just switched them off. And you can see where this story is going. Sooner or later, this beautiful thing that we built started collapsing and crumbling up until the point where half of it had been switched off, and we ignored the results from the other half because it wasn't really relevant to us anymore. So the lesson, tooling by itself only goes so far. And I just told the story of stuff breaking, but it's important to realize this is not just about stuff breaking. It's also, even if the tooling is like 100% reliable, which of course is impossible, it becomes outdated. Your requirements change. Mobile apps are a good example. I remember when we started out building mobile apps, it was like a toy project. You were a serious company. The website was what really mattered. And then, you hired some kid out of university or whatever to build like a mobile app just to see what was possible. Now, mobile apps are a core part of many companies' strategy. You need far more testing, far more resilience. 1 star on your mobile app rating is like a disaster. So requirements change. So your tooling, even if it's very reliable, can become out of date. So you need something to make sure that this tooling stays working and it stays relevant to your current process. And where does that come from? Well, this resilient, this phrase is massively overused, so I think I may take it out. But it basically comes from making this part of your culture, making this part of your DNA. As I'm not saying you should do what I do, namely interrupt your girlfriend over dinner and try and fix a build job, but somebody needs to feel, the team should feel that this stuff is really important, and if it's not working, then we have a problem. It's not just something that runs over there, and if it breaks, well, big deal, I can still write my code, so what's the problem? And this is part of what we are trying to achieve. And of course, this is not easy. This is why it's a quick win chasm, because once you see the initial improvement, you're like, yeah, but it's working, isn't it? Why should we now set up a project to maintain it? Because we already had a project to build it. It's working. So it's tempting to look at this initial improvement and say, yay, but the really important thing is be aware that even if it's nice and shiny now, it needs constant love, care, attention to remain with the benefit. So some things I've learned in subsequent projects on how to try and address some of this. Make sure the management knows what you've done. I mean, they typically have to know because they probably signed off on the initial project. But especially if you did that initial project kind of in-house, make people aware that you did this and that it's delivered a lot of benefit, but that in order to keep delivering the benefit, you need money, you need like time. So there has to be a project or something, there has to be some way for somebody to actually spend real time on keeping this stuff going. If you're trying to start out with something like this, and you don't feel anybody within your organization really knows what it's like or has any experience with it, then go find someone who has. Because it's very difficult to keep something running and to keep something like up to date if you don't really know what it should look like. And that's one of the dangers of getting outside consultants, and they know what it should look like, but then they're gone. So it's much easier to make a team enthusiastic about doing something like this. If there's someone who's come from somewhere else where they do this, and who can, with enthusiasm and just understanding, explain why it's useful and why it's good. Otherwise you get the classic, yeah, but why should we do this? We've been building code on our laptops forever. Works just fine. Why do we need to change? Make champions. So give people a motivation. Don't just say you're spending too much time with tooling. Make them the champion for this. Give them an incentive to do it. Tell them they're doing a good job. And make them heroes about this. And that's part of making things visible. So show people that this is going on. We are building this thing. It's going to be cool. This is where we're now. This is where we're going to go. This is what we can do already. Keep communicating. And that doesn't mean like write press releases. This isn't going to be beautiful all the time. Like any other project, it's not going to be perfect. And making people understand that, this isn't a silver bullet that will solve everything, or we're not going to have it finished at the beginning, is important too. Sorry. We're talking about ultimately delivering faster, better, more visibly to our customers. Well, we should use the same principles when we think about delivering our initial tooling strategy as well. So I have 15 more minutes, that's about right. So let's get practical. Lots of fun, high-level ideas here, but now let's talk about some real simple things you can do. And you'll see these are all pretty related to each other, which is good because, of course, the idea is that the tooling gives rise to these practices. So code reviews. Why is this important? Well, it increases the quality of the code, but it also increases overall understanding of what different bits of code do, which ultimately makes your development process a bit more resilient. We can put millions and millions of automated checks in place, but the real checkers for the real problem cases tend to be humans who understand what weird things could happen. Now, you can take this to extremes. I was at Guild Group in the US talking to their VP of architecture. They're like a flash sale, buy 10,000 shoes for like, 50 euros or whatever. Probably 500 euros because they're normally those kind of shoes. But they have this nice modern microservices architecture. It's Mesos based, I think, or Docker, or it's not Docker, it's one of the other containers. Anyway, all lovely and modern, and it's like the most beautiful modern architecture you could imagine. But there's 250 or so of these microservices, and so I asked them, so how do you know which services actually depend on which other services, so that when you deploy one, you're not going to break 3 others? They're like, well, we expect developers to pick that up in the code review. I'm like, wow. Okay, so that works if you're a small shop, so don't take code review too far, just as a lesson. But they really heavily rely on this, also for operational stability, not just for code quality. CI, yeah, that's the obvious one. This really helps because if you're doing lots of development on different things, classic example, you kind of should know whether you're able to release something. So get a CI server. Be aware that CI is not really just a tool. Doing CI is not about having a CI server. A CI server really helps. Arguably, it's essential, but CI is a practice about also how you manage your branches, how you manage your code. The fact that you have one known version that you could release at this point, if it's good enough, that has recent stuff in it. There's an interesting blog called Continuous Integration on $1 a Day, where somebody describes how to do CI with an old laptop, a bell, and a rubber chicken. Hopefully that's made you interested in reading it. No, his point is really, it's not about the tools, it's about a practice. And tools help, but it's not all of it. Deployment. Yeah, if it takes you an Excel spreadsheet and a service ticket and 6 hours or so to get an app running in a target environment, it's going to be difficult to make this fast and reliable. Obviously, it would be fantastic if you used our deployment tool for this purpose because it's brilliant. But no, whatever you do here to automate your deployment. If you write a script, if you want to go to a full stack deployment model where everything's a container, whatever, just figure out a way to do this automatically and reliably. Testing and quality. This tends to be like the forgotten stepchild of CD a little bit. Most people I speak to when I say, so what are your technical initiatives? What are you actually building? They talk about building a pipeline, automated environment provisioning, I think that's the next point, automated deployment, and yeah, well, testing, well, we'll do that later because it's complicated and we don't really know how to do it, and there's so many tests we have to write. And I'm like, okay, so you're building, you're taking a sort of slow delivery process and turning it into a rocket, but you have no idea whether the stuff that you're delivering is any good. That turns a slow crash into a really, really fast crash. That's not a good idea. Yes, testing is difficult and hard to do, and it's difficult to say to your boss, well, we need so and so many thousands or hundreds of thousands of euros to add all these tests. But if you don't find a way to do quality control and risk analysis, because that's really what testing is, on what you're delivering, your process is going to have a bit of a problem because there's nothing like a high-profile production failure to make your boss unhappy about CD. So think about this. This doesn't have to mean you boil the ocean, right? It doesn't mean that you have to suddenly think, oh my God, well, now we have to write 10,000 functional tests and 10,000 performance tests. No, take the most important use case first. What would be the worst thing that could happen of our system? What is the most important thing that users do with it? Well, write tests to verify that case. And then write more tests to verify the next most important case. So don't do all the unit tests first. Because what's the point of having 10,000 unit tests and no performance tests? That doesn't tell you anything about whether your code is good enough to go live. Provisioning, I mentioned that, yeah, it's another obvious one. Most people I speak to, and I'm sure it's the same here, have some kind of cloud virtualization thing going on. Being able to set up environments quickly is really important here. If you're going to have 5 or 6 pipelines running in parallel and they all bottleneck on one shared environment, that's going to dampen your ability to do CD quickly. And the problem with shared environments, obviously, is that they also tend to break pretty regularly. Orchestration. So we've talked about pipelines. It's a nice concept. Everybody can draw on the whiteboard, boxes and arrows. But you need something, some tool, ultimately, to orchestrate the actual sequence of events. CI servers are a common choice for that. Things like Go are sometimes used for that if you have a fully automated pipeline. Those all work. We have an orchestration tool that's focused on a slightly different area with a sort of more manual process. Whatever you choose, you have to have something to do orchestration. So think about these kinds of tooling. By the way, I don't think you need to make notes. The slides will be online, so you can grab it all from there. Monitoring. So this is, monitoring takes many different forms. And of course, I'm sure you already have like OS level monitoring and CPU stuff and all that kind of stuff. What I'm really talking about here more is kind of monitoring, figuring out once your stuff goes live, whether it's really doing what it should be doing. It's great to have a pipeline that can push stuff live, but if you then have no insight into how people are using that new feature, that doesn't really help you a lot. CD ultimately is about the feedback loop. Check something, figure out a new idea, write code, do it again, do it again, do it again. You have to find a way to verify what you've just delivered. And this can take many forms. It can be APM tooling. One of the best things that very few people I know do is instrument your code. You're writing the code. You know that you want people, when you move the button from the left to the right, to click on it more. So capture how often they click it. You can write that code. But also some interesting things. There are companies that do measurements around like social things. They automatically scan Twitter feeds and Facebook posts and whatever to try to see whether your users are happy or what they say about your app. Like, hashtag whatever company released a great new app or whatever. So that's interesting feedback as well. Practices. And you'll see relations here, as I already warned you. Keep changes small. If you have an app that is like a 2 gigabyte ear file that contains most of the internet, well, not the kittens, but most of the internet that's like code, that's going to be a bottleneck on your process in general. It's going to take a long time to build. It's going to take a long time to deploy, and typically it's going to be difficult to make small changes to the system. One of the essential things about CD, the ability to be faster, but also to reduce the level of risk, is to make smaller changes. And we were speaking to a customer, they made a good point. They said, like, we're still stuck in thinking in releases. Like, a release is a big thing. It's like, it's heavy, it's got hundreds of new features or whatever. Now, for them, the idea that changing the font color could be a release is like impossible. Because so releases, no, we have to do so much stuff for a release. There's no way we can make a small change. CD is about changing that. If you can get this quick and easy and efficient, and you don't have to have like thousands of people doing stuff, you can make small changes to production. And then, of course, people also understand that the risk goes down. Changing the font color doesn't sound so scary, even to traditional release people. Quality before functionality. I've said quite a bit of this about testing, but it's also a mindset. No, great that we've implemented this new feature, but does it actually work? You know, not just functionally, but is it nice? Is it fast enough? Is it misaligned and it looks ugly to the user? So try to make stuff good. If you release often and you cheat on the quality, very quickly your application's quality is going to creak and go down, and users are going to be not so happy with it. Putting tests up front. Well, I think we see a lot of trends right now around like spec-driven development, things like Cucumber or whatever, where people say, yeah, why do, instead of having like a document that describes what the code should do in human language, and then halfway through the process trying to get a tester to convert that into some test script, why don't I write the test script first? Because then not only I'm not going to lose something in the translation process, but I can also run this test pretty quickly. Oh, no, I have to go 2 more down. Yeah, this is that point. I can run the test as soon as I have it, and as soon as the test passes, then I probably don't need to do much more work. Now, I know this as a developer myself. There's a big temptation to write beautiful code. Not just efficient code, but like beautiful code. And it can always be a little more beautiful. You can always refactor it a little nicer. And I enjoy that, of course, but ultimately that's not necessarily very efficient. There's a trade-off here. So having tests up front also means you can figure out pretty quickly when you're done with a feature, and then you should try to put it live rather than making it totally beautiful. Getting everybody involved early, that's a real DevOps kind of idea, obviously. Make sure your developers know how the system's going to run in production, what the network constraints are, whether there's a load balancer or not. I remember my girlfriend works at a company, so they use Elasticsearch a lot. And their dev environment, it's Vagrant, so every developer can spin up an environment. And they were using Elasticsearch in single mode, like single server mode or whatever. That's great, but it never runs like that in production. It runs clustered in production, and that has implications because it behaves differently. So what they did, smart move, their Vagrant images now contain a clustered version. It's a simple cluster, it's like 2 of them and they only use 1 of them. But it means that you run in a real environment. This is part of getting everybody involved early. And yeah, ongoing user dialogue. So that is thinking not about my users as these really annoying people who eventually complain about all the stuff that I wrote. These are should be our friends to some extent. We're trying to do stuff for them, they have feedback for us. We're really in a conversation with them when we're doing CD. They want something, we think they want something, we do it, we see what they say, and we keep going. So it's not like we have an internal conversation to try to think what our users would want, and then we do it, and then we see how they react, but we're actually talking to our users. Right, oh God, I've got to speed up. Delivery tooling, serious tooling, yes. Once you have a pipeline and it breaks, this can impact your ability to go to production. CI shouldn't run on a server under your desk. This needs to be backed up, it needs to be high available, it needs to be all the stuff that your production systems would be, because it's really important stuff. It's not just a bit of dev tooling anymore. This is part of your ability to go live. All right, oops. Culture, we can always do better. So you're never done. I mean, you might have achieved all the goals you need for now, but this is no group think. You shouldn't think, no, we've built this, it's perfect now. We never need to do any more. If somebody has a good idea, they should be able to voice it, and then you have a trade-off, do we need it right now or not? That's fine. But there should always be the idea that we can do better in the way we do things. It's ours. It's not like the business's service and our users' features and in the marketing department's users. We're all in the same organization ultimately. So we are all delivering the service, and the features are useful for us, for all of us. It includes our users as well. Us includes the business. So this is sometimes pretty difficult to do because the business actually sometimes quite likes the idea that they don't have to talk to IT for 6 months. Well, unfortunately, if you're doing CD, then that's not going to work. It's nice to put them in a position of control, but they have to take responsibility and spend time. It's like trying to have a product owner who's never there in all the sprints. Yeah, that doesn't work. There has to be an awareness that yes, we're all in this together, including the business, but they also have to invest time in this. Tools work for the team. When you get to all this tooling, it shouldn't be a magic black box that makes people unnecessary or that forces people to do something the way the tools want to do it. The tools support the team in doing their job. The tools take away boring, inefficient manual tasks, but they have to give you insight and you have to remain in control. There's lots of interesting research in safety critical systems like nuclear power plants and so on about what happens when you get this wrong, when you make tools that people can't influence anymore. They're just like black boxes that don't tell you anything and have tremendous control, then stuff can go really bad. Nobody goes home if the delivery system is broken. This is just an extension of nobody goes home if the build is broken. We need to feel that this stuff is really important. It's not just, oh, well, all the builds are red again, no big deal. Getting started, yeah, I'm almost at the end. So, what do you do now? How would you start? Well, the most useful thing I always find is to do like a value stream analysis. It's just a lean manufacturing technique. Basically, get a big piece of paper or use Excel release or whatever and map out your current process. Write down which steps you do and roughly how long they take normally, how long you think they take, and how long the gaps are between the steps. And then you will very quickly see, okay, well, this is roughly what our process looks like now. And approach this with an open mind. If you start this process with the idea that, well, that's the way it is and it's never going to change because that's the way it is and we've always done it this way and blah, 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 then this is, there's no point. You have to have the idea that we're going to look at what we have, and if we want to do things better, some things are going to have to change. Maybe some things can't change, but something will have to change. Incremental goals. If you talk about like trying to improve your process, I like to think about, what would the 5 things, if I gave you 2 days, what would you do to make things better? I typically in these discussions, I make it illegal to say we're going to rebuild everything, because that never happens in a real organization. You have to think in terms of small goals. And whether you talk about a week or a day or whatever, make incremental goals, don't boil the ocean. And as I said at long length already, start with tooling, go after the low-hanging fruit, blah, 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 lots more stuff. Testing and quality comes then. As I said, that's very important. Single changes are important. Try to figure out a way to change your architecture to make this possible. You don't need to do that immediately, but you will need to do it at some point. And I also said at long length, make sure the business is aware that they need to be engaged in the process. They get to drive the car, but they have to be sitting at the wheel. Right, so lots more info. The formatting went really weird on this slide. Don't worry about it. Thank you very much.